I've already said that one's yours.
You see those names there?
John said it was yours first.
Sure.
I just skip over the names.
Yeah, it's not me too.
Well, it was a misunderstanding. I thought when Betty walked in, she said, I look like something the wind blew in. So, okay, we'll start here in just a moment. I think Miss Pat's about to come in. Rhonda is not here today. She took Hannah to a doctor appointment this morning, so it won't be too long. And then she'll be on. And anybody sick? It's good to have. Yeah. Alrighty, well, before we begin with our study today, let's go to Heavenly Father in word of prayer. And Dale, would you mind leading us in that prayer?
Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this beautiful day and for the good night's rest that we had and for this privilege we have of being able to come together to be with brothers and sisters in Christ to share a common love for Thee. We're thankful, Father, for Your love and Your patience with each one of us, for Your willingness to send Your Son to die upon the cross that we might have everlasting life if we be faithful to Thee. And we're thankful for Your Word and the freedom we have being able to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. We're thankful for John and his willingness to prepare, and we ask that You be with him this morning, that he might lead us in a discussion of Nehemiah, and that we might have a full understanding of those things that You expect us to know, so that we can be the kind of servants that You'd have us be. And help us so we might always look for opportunities to teach and encourage others, that they might know the joys of being a Christian before it's everlasting too late. We ask also, Father, that You be with those of our numbers who are spiritually sick, that their faith might be increased, that they might have a great desire to serve Thee and look forward to going to heaven. And we ask that You be with those of our numbers who have physical ailments, that they might be restored to their health. Go with us throughout this day and throughout our lives. In Jesus Christ's holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. One thing I did fail to mention, hello, Miss Pat.
Good morning, Pat.
All righty. We'll let you read the first set of names this morning.
Verse 1 through 27.
I know, I've read them, but not out loud, not in class.
I wanted to let you know, because we haven't sent it out to the email yet. Yesterday at 3:36, Alina Faye Kemp was born. If you hadn't heard yet. Yeah. Cindy and Jesse's daughter. 8 pounds, 7, Alina, Alina, Faye Kemp. 8 pounds, 7 ounces, and 19.25 inches long.
Big girl.
I knew she wasn't going to wait till 28. There was no way.
Yeah, she looked like Sunday she was going to pop. I mean,
Yes.
So that was yesterday?
yes, that was yesterday.
What day?
Tuesday.
I just thought she was gaining weight.
I mean the day.
Monday, I'm sorry. Not
the day.
Tuesday.
The date.
20.
Oh, the 15th.
15th.
15th, yep.
See that.
So
She missed it 4 days.
Where's she missed it 4 days?
they were hoping for a Halloween baby, and Jesse said on the look side they got it, but
There's no way she's going to go that long. There's no way.
no, they posted a picture on Facebook, and if I think about it before we leave here, I'll call it up and show it to you. But
I'll tell you what, you're sharp today. I can't wait to see Rhonda, and now I can't wait to see Jesse and Cindy.
I don't know what you're talking about there.
I asked Jesse early on if it was going to be a boy this time.
Mhm.
He said, I'm working on that.
Yeah, no boy.
4 girls later.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we say that. I mean, we had 3 girls, and it took us adopting to get our first boy, and then we got Jeremiah. So it's always possible.
Should have stayed with you.
Our son had.
Pat, you've been there.
All righty.
4 girls later, we had them.
All right, let's turn in our Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 10. That's where we're resuming this morning. Nehemiah chapter 10. And here in this particular section, we just gone through them essentially repenting before God or confessing of the transgressions. Not their immediate, but just the people as a whole, the transgressions, the history of the people, I should say, to God. And then in start of chapter 10, we're going to go through some names here of those who are going to seal a covenant, if you would. We've mentioned this before, that oftentimes when you look at the history of God's people, going all the way back to, them when they led out of Egypt, when they were led out of Egypt, with every generation, God reestablishes, if you would, the covenant with His people. He reminds the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. And here we see the same thing happening. They have now been out of the Babylonian captivity for a good number of years. And they have finally rebuilt the temple. They've got the walls rebuilt. They've been rebuilding the houses there in Jerusalem. Ezra has now, everybody came together and Ezra read the law to them. And they acknowledged the transgressions of the people as a whole and the history of the people. And so now in chapter 10 is kind of a sealing of a covenant here, again, with God. And I would suggest that even under the new covenant of Christ, there's a manner of speaking where each generation renews the covenant, or more to the point with every time someone becomes a Christian, there is a renewing of that covenant or a making of the covenant with that new individual, the one that's become a child of God. But in this case in point, it's important that he reminded every generation, just as it's important to us, that we remind every generation of Christians that come up of the law of God. Now, kind of the difference is, now I'm trying not to stray too far, is under the Jewish time period, what did it take typically to make someone a Jew and part of the covenant people?
Circumcision was one.
Okay, but
So
that's
being
true.
born into it, but you could also be a proselyte.
Be proselyte, exactly. I was going to say you had to be born a Jew, but really the circumcision, it was it.
Yeah.
And that enables both the Jew, those who were born a Jew, and those who are proselyted in. Okay. But when someone was born a Jew, they, as a child, had to be taught about God. They weren't born knowing God. They had to be taught about Him. Now, the significance of that is in Jeremiah chapter 31, beginning in verse 31, in the prophecy there that the Hebrew writer references, he says a time would come, He'll make a new covenant, and in those days they will no longer say to their neighbor, know the Lord, for all will know me. So under the new covenant of Christ, every person who becomes a Christian knows the Lord. You know, there are no citizens of the kingdom now of the body of this royal nation that we go up to and say, let me tell you about God. You know, like the Jews would have to train their children. One becomes a Christian, a part of this royal nation, this holy priesthood, because their knowledge of God. Okay, and so just kind of say that to kind of elaborate on the differences between then and now, and just to reiterate what they're about to do here in chapter 10. Any thoughts? All right, let's go ahead and do a little bit of reading here. We're going to start with verse 1 of Nehemiah chapter 10. And I'll begin reading there, and we'll read down to...
Verse 27.
yeah, you're right about that. All right, let's see. Let's start there, beginning in verse 1. We'll read down through verse 27 there. We'll kind of break it up as we go. He says, now those who placed their seal on the document were, now this is the agreement, the document that they're agreeing to, the covenant. Nehemiah the governor, the son of Hakaliah, and Zedekiah, Zariah, Azariah, Jeremiah, Pashur, Amariah, Malchijah, and Hadish, Shebaniah, and Malchuk, Harim, Miramoth, Obadiah, Daniel, Jenathan, and Baruch, Meshullam, Abijah, Miramin, Maazah, Bilgai, and Shimei. These were the priests. All right, let's pause there for a moment and go back up to verse 1 for just a second there. What were some of the methods, and probably one of the more memorable methods that people would use to place a seal upon something?
It's usually hot wax.
Yeah, usually hot wax. You think about a king. You know, a king would have a signet ring. And the signet ring would kind of serve as his signature of sort. So whenever a message was to be delivered there, they would close the message up, put hot wax on it, and place the ring in it and let the wax harden, and it would have his seal. And if someone received that letter and the seal was broken, they knew it had already been read. So if it was, personal direct message there. And it may be here that the seal that they're talking about is something similar. Some sort of impression made by some sort of maybe family ring or something to that effect there. But who were all these people? What were their positions?
Priest.
Priests, exactly. They were priests. All right, any thoughts or comments? All right, now let's step to the next group of people.
One person
Go ahead,
that's
Jeff.
not mentioned in there though is Ezra.
Ezra's not mentioned, is he? Not among the priests there.
He's not mentioned, period.
Okay. What are your thoughts about that? Dale?
Well, there are some commentaries that suggest that he could have been sick or something, some reason that he was not there.
Okay.
But there's no scripture to tell us why he wasn't there.
Okay. And it may be, and understand, these would not be the sum total of the priests. There would have been more priests than this. They may have been selected based on their influence or maybe their family within the priesthood. I'm not very certain.
Yeah,
Yes.
Verse 1 talks about the Tershatha, which is the governor.
Yes.
Was that Ezra or was that Ezra's brother?
Well, Nehemiah is the one that had turned the governor, the reign of the city over to his brother. But Nehemiah is listed as the governor, at least in the New King James Version. There in verse 1.
Here's what Matthew Henry says.
Okay.
He says, the names of those public persons who, as the representatives and heads of the congregation, set their hands and seals to this covenant, because it would have been an endless piece of work for every particular person to do it. And if these leading men did their part in the pursuance of this covenant, their example would have a good influence upon all the people. Now, observe, Nehemiah, of course, was mentioned here. He's the governor. But there were 22 priests. And let's see, 17 Levites. And 44 of the chief of the people gave it under their hands for themselves and all the rest, chiefly those whom they had influence upon, and they would keep God's commandments.
Yeah. It would make more reasonable that it would be more noted leaders, maybe selected by the people or selected by those who were in maybe the chief priests or the high priest possibly, selected as a better representation of the people. Possible. Any other thoughts?
John, is there a high priest in this lot? It doesn't seem to be.
Well, there would have been. He's just not identified.
Okay.
Yeah, he's just not noted here. Now, I don't remember. I was trying to think, and I don't have a ready answer for you.
And that's okay. I was just curious. I don't think they'll.
Well, what I was trying to recall is whether or not there were multiple high priests at a time, or if I do know that by Jewish tradition, the high priest would serve for a year. All right, and then, for instance, like in the case of John the Baptizer's father, Zechariah, it came, from what I understand, by tradition that they would take turns, because one of the greatest things they had to do every year was go into the most holy place, okay, and offer the sacrifice or the trespass offering, I believe. And it was very dangerous. And by Jewish tradition, I had one teacher tell me that in his studies, that the Jews had a practice of tying a rope to like the ankle of the high priest. Because if he did something wrong where he went and he was struck dead, there was no way of getting him out. And so kind of a safety precaution, if something happened to him, they just drag him out there. Now, true, whether that's accurate or not, that's one thing that I had heard. But I don't remember hearing whether or not, I wanted to say there were multiple high priests, but they took turns on that particular rotation and going in there. So it could be that if there were multiple high priests, that some of them very well could have been among the number, but it wasn't important to note it, at this time period. Any other thoughts? I should have remembered that, but I want to say there are multiple high priests at a time, but I would have to go back and look at that and confirm it. Yes, Dan.
For whatever reason, these people are listed and they were the only ones that they used. It would be a good representation of the whole. it's probably, we may not know why, at this point of our study, why these people were the only ones listed, but it would be a good representation of the whole. It could be like a representation from each county in each state or something like that, to put it over into our language. Just like if the United States was listed, or if we listed a prominent men to sign a document, it could be a representative from each county of each state or whatever,
Right.
or something like that.
Going back to Pat's question, the high priest at this time was Elisha, and Elisha is not mentioned in this list.
Elisha
How come?
or Eliashib. Okay.
I have it right up there.
Yeah. Notice here in Numbers chapter 20, not Numbers, Nehemiah chapter 12, verse 10. Pardon me there. Let me bring this up for the folks at home. Starting in, let's back up to verse 12 where we need to be. Let's start in verse 12 there. Now in the days of Jehoiakim the priest, the heads of the fathers' houses were, and many of the names that you see listed here, many of those individuals' names are the names that we just read. So kind of helping, and this goes back to what Dale was pointing out from Clark's or Henry's. Henry's. That these were probably the heads, these were the heads of the fathers' houses. The very influential one. And the high priest, as per, if I remember correctly, as per the rotation, as you said, was Eliashib right there. Yeah. Although that doesn't identify, but that would make sense.
He's not listed in this list
Okay.
here in the 10th chapter.
And it's probably not really important as far as him being present to sign it. I mean, there's no doubt he was present. But these men were selected for a particular reason. And basically, they were, if you kind of think about it, a representation of the people, and as has already been pointed out, for the people as well. All righty, let's see. Let's come down then to verse 9, and let's look at a couple of verses here, starting with verse 9. And these are going to be the priests, or the Levites. Let me turn back there. Starting there in verse 9 there, he says the Levites, they were Jeshua, the son of Azaniah, Binnui of the sons of Henadad, and Kadmiel. Then he mentions their brethren, Shebaniah, Hadijah, and Kalida, Peliah, and Hanan, Micah, Rehob, Hashabiah, Zakur, Sherebiah, Shebaniah, Hodiah, Bani, and Beninu. Okay, that's why they didn't get the first listing. Their names were harder for people to pronounce. So these were, as he says here, the Levites. Now, were all priests Levites? Okay, were all Levites priests? No. And so again, another section of leadership or representative there for the people. Any thoughts? Okay, let's come down then to verse 14 there. So now he lists the leaders of the people in verse 14. And let's start there. The King James Version uses the phrase, the chief of the people, and it lists several others, or several of them as we look at. The New King James renders it the leaders of the people here. So verse 14, the leaders of the people, Parosh, Pahat Moab, Elam, Zatu, Bani, and Buni, and Azgad, and Bibai, and Adonijah, and Bigvai, as opposed to his twin Shortbai, Aden, Ader, and Hezekiah, Azur, Hadana, Hadijah, and Hajum, and Bezai. And then in verse 19, Harith, Anathoth, and Nebai, and Magpiash, Meshullam, and Herzir. And then verse 21 there, Meshezabel, Zadok, Jadua, Pelatiah, and Hanan, and Hanani. It's not quite pronounced right. And, well, Hannah, yeah. Hoshea, Hanani, and Hashub, and Halohesh, and Pilhah, Shobek, Rehum, Hashbani, Messiah, Ahiah, I'm not going to read straight after this, Hanan, Anan, Malkuk, Haram, and Banah.
We need Jeremiah here. I bet you he can say these names.
All right, so these were the chief of the people or the leaders of the people, the more influential, maybe even appointed leaders of sorts.
One other group of people you don't see listed are the prophets,
That's true.
but in all probabilities, there were some of them there at this time, even though they were not listed.
Yeah. We noticed Daniel and Jeremiah in the listings. I mean, those probably were not the same ones that we know of as far as the actual prophet Jeremiah and the prophet Daniel. Matter of fact, what happened to the prophet Jeremiah? He was carried off into Egypt just at the beginning of just after, if I remember correctly, after Josiah died, when the city kind of began to rebel against the Babylonian influence. He was carried away, I think, by Shishak to Egypt. But that's a very good point Dale pointed out there. We don't see the prophets listed, whoever would be living at this point. Well, let's think about the minor prophets. Who were the two minor prophets that encouraged the people to continue building the temple, to get back to it? Not Obadiah. Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, and Zechariah. Sorry, it's the last two there.
I think they're mentioned in the latter part of verse 28.
Yeah, I wondered when you look ahead here that
Everyone who had knowledge and understanding.
they would have been a part of that group there. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. Dan just summed that up for us very easily.
But
Every-
clearly the listing didn't include all the priests or all
Right.
the Levites, because verse 27, as Dan says, and the rest of the people, the Levites and the priests, so there were more.
Yeah, exactly.
They were not mentioned.
And what it is, those people sealed the document or put their seal of agreement on it. Everybody else here, and we'll talk about this here in verse 29, they all joined together into the curse and the oath to walk before God's law. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. Well, let's go ahead and begin our reading this morning. Official reading. Maybe a minimum number of names there. Starting with verse 28. And I'm going to start in the back this morning with Sister Decker. So if you would read for us beginning in verse 28, and let's read 28 and 29, please.
And the rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, the porters, the singers, the Nethinim, and all they that had separated themselves from the people of the lands unto the law of God, their wives, their sons, and their daughters, every one having knowledge and having understanding. They clave to their brethren, their nobles, and entered into a curse and into an oath, to walk to God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord our Lord, and his judgments and his statutes.
All right, and then Miss Phyllis, would you read 30 and 31, please? Or Miss Pat, I'm sorry.
We will not give our daughters to the people of the land, or take their daughters for our sons. And if the peoples of the land bring in goods or any grain on the Sabbath day to sell, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath or on a holy day, and we will forego the crops of the 7th year and the exaction of every debt.
Okay,
That was the English version.
you did fine. Okay, let's go back here for a moment to verse 28 here. And notice here that he makes the point at the starting of this right here, that now the rest of the people, this is everybody else, as we pointed out a while ago, the rest of the priests, the rest of the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, the Nethinim. Who did we say that Nethinims were?
Helpers of the Levites.
Yeah, kind of helpers of the Levites there, helpers of the priests there in the temple. And all those who had separated themselves from the peoples of the lands to the law of God, including their wives, their sons, and their daughters, Everyone who had knowledge and everyone who had understanding. So, in other words, all of the people who had the understanding, who had separated themselves apart and made the commitment, if you would, and this is what the covenant, what they were sealing here was all about. Okay, they all joined with their brethren, they joined with their nobles, and they entered into a curse and an oath to walk in God's law. Now let's pause here for just a moment, and let's think back a couple of weeks to a lesson that we looked at on Sunday night. We talked about two mountains that were significant when the children of Israel entered the land. Moses in Deuteronomy says, here's what you'll use the mountains for. And Joshua did that very thing. And you had two mountains, and in between the mountains here, there was a city by the name of Shechem. One mountain was used to pronounce blessings from God. The other one was used to pronounce cursings. Who remembers the name of the mountain that you would use to pronounce blessings?
Gerizim?
Yeah, Gerizim.
Gerizim.
And I've just drawn a complete blank on how to spell it. We'll try that. And what was the name of the other one? Ebal. Rhonda told me I had my chart backwards because when I was going through the lesson and everything, I would say over here is Mount Ebal and over here is Mount Gerizim. Forgetting that on my chart I had them reversed. So it'd be more effective. I should have done it the other way. But anyway, so
Was one mountain taller
you
than
taught
the
us.
other?
I have no idea. It wasn't my illustration though. The cursings piled up more than the blessings did. How about that? But upon one of these mountains, it was on Ebal, Joshua built an altar for them to worship the Lord or to offer sacrifice there at this pronouncing. However, the Samaritans changed it, and years later they put the altar here essentially, and that's why the Samaritan woman said that, we worship at Mount Gerizim. You say you have to worship in Jerusalem in John chapter 24 there. So now the reason why I bring this out is that Moses told them in Deuteronomy, when you go in, you're going to have these two mountains, and part of Israel is going to be here, part of Israel is going to be here, and the blessings and the cursings, here they are. And Joshua did that. When they finally got into the land after the victory God gave them at Ai, they went and they set this up here, and part of them were here, part of them was here, and then the blessings and cursings were read. Now the blessings and cursings were very simple, okay? It is, if you obey God, then here's what's going to happen to you. If you disobey God, then this is what's going to happen to you. Blessings and cursings, and again, I did it opposite my illustration. Okay. Any thoughts or comments? Now, the reason why I bring the significance of this is because of verse 29. Now, this is not to say that they're going to go here to do this, but this is the effective thing that they're doing in establishing the covenant with this new generation here of people. They entered into a curse and an oath to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God. Any thoughts or any comments about that?
It's a very effective way to show graphically the separation of sin from good.
Mm-hmm.
You said that there's no connection between the two. They're absolutely different, and they're maintained separately.
That's exactly right.
And we choose.
And every oath has a curse with it.
That's right.
Every oath that you take has a curse with it.
Right.
This is not something that's unusual because if you do not abide by your oath, consequently, you have a curse.
Well, don't we as parents do that with our children?
It's every
Consequence.
Yeah.
Every law has a curse with it.
Exactly.
If you're disobedient.
That's exactly right.
Cause and effect.
And that's a good point. We use the term consequence today. Rewards on the flip side, but generally consequence can apply both, depending on how you're talking about it. But cause and effect would be another way. G? What are you going to say? Any other thoughts or comments? All right, let's come back to this now and continuing there in verse 29 there. These were given, which were given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and to do all the commandments of the Lord our God, and his ordinance and his statutes. King James Version says within the list there, judgments. And so this goes all the way back to when they were on Mount, actually, I was going to say Mount Sinai. In part, that's true. But these latter commands regarding Mount Gerizim and Ebal was stated at the end of Deuteronomy, just prior to their entrance into the promised land there. But still, when you go back to Exodus and Numbers, you see the same thing there. If you obey me, here's what will happen. If you disobey me, this is what will happen. And so the people here, let's not forget this, the people, they all entered into this covenant. They agreed to it. And that's why it's significant that he clarifies here, everyone who had knowledge and understanding. Those individuals were the ones that entered into this full agreement to obey the Lord. All right? Any thoughts? Now, notice what they continue. They go on to say, and remember, here we have these people. They've just gone through the history that Ezra presented, all right, of their disobedience to God and all the things that they had done. Well, here they say, we would not give our daughters as wives to the peoples of the land, nor take their daughters for our son. That was stated by Moses from the very outset of their departure. When God led them out of the land of Egypt, taking them into the wilderness onto Mount Sinai, that was one of the conditions that God made with the people there. We see that back in Exodus chapter 34, Deuteronomy 7, and others, that they were not to take wives or husbands from the inhabitants of the land. Why?
Lead them
Because
away.
of their idol worship and sinful nature, not nature, but the way they conducted their lives
Okay.
could spoil the Israelites in their worship.
What was Solomon's
Yeah.
biggest problem?
His wives. Plural.
You said idolatrous foreign.
Exactly.
That's good.
Well, let me kind of correct that a little bit. Yes, his wives were the problem, but he allowed himself to be led by the wives. Yeah, he didn't. Don't take this wrong way. He didn't dominate the wives as far as the kingly head of the house. He bowed to them. He served them essentially. Pat, do you have your hand up?
That's our example. Not to let our kids marry outside their faith. And Solomon being the wisest. Our kids think they can't be outsmarted. Well, Solomon surely was, and he was the wisest man. There was no comparison. Nobody could compare to Solomon other than the Lord.
Well, I would suggest, Pat, that
And parents are the same way.
Yeah.
We can't.
there's more to it.
Those are
It's not as
complicated.
Yeah, it's not as simple as saying don't let your kids marry outside of the faith. Okay. The reason why I say that is it's not about who they marry. It's about how they behave in that marriage. Okay. For instance, all right, if you have a very strong-willed individual who's faithful before God, no matter who he marries, he will never walk away from God. Okay. If you have someone who follows God by tradition of the family, or because that's all they've ever known, and they spout the rhetoric that their parents spout and everything, then when they marry someone outside of the church, then their loyalties will begin to blend over at some point, unless their parents have a heavy influence over them in their married life. All right, but anytime then their parents aren't around, then they'll just do whatever they want to do, and their parents kind of pull them back in. You've got some people who don't realize how weak they are until they finally get together with somebody who wants to do something different. And then they just lure them. It's like, well, whatever you want, honey, I'll do, you know. I have known individuals, I know this one family, very faithful. When they were married, she was a member of the church, he was not. And she converted him. But I know another instance where the woman, the man was not a member of the church, the woman was, and he was converted, she fell away. No, it's even, let me back up to get the story right. She was raised in the church, she never obeyed the gospel. They got married, he was converted. She didn't obey the gospel until some 40 years later. Finally obeyed the gospel. One girl I grew up with, raised up within the church, she married a member of the church who ended up cheating on her, and they got a divorce. So there's too much out there to simply say, well, you need to keep your kids from marrying someone who's not a Christian. That's not the solution. The solution is we got to have strong kids. Now, I think it's a valid question to ask. Do I want to spend the rest of my life with someone who won't go to heaven with me? That's a very valid question we need to teach our young people to ask. We need to teach them to consider the cause and the effect. I may marry this person and they're not a Christian, but I'll be able to teach them. You don't know that. And you don't want them being baptized and going to church out of loyalty to you. And so, in this case in point, though, you might look at it this way. These people had a hard enough time avoiding the influences of the people around them. They didn't need to bring it into their homes as spouses. And God knew this about them.
But on the other hand, we
Yes.
must keep in mind that these very people that have made this vow, this commitment to obey God's commands, are the very people who had transgressed against God earlier.
The leaders.
Not
Yeah.
not necessarily the leaders, but all the Jews. It was some of the leaders, it was the remnant that brought them back in line.
Right.
That, reminded them of God's commitment to them, and they need to have that same commitment to God.
Right.
And so now they've signed this document, and this is further stating that they would not give their daughters as wives to the world. They would not allow the world to influence them in their Jewish tradition and in obeying God. But it's the very same people that just earlier had been guilty of all this.
That's
So
a good
they're
point.
just renewing their vows.
That's a very good point.
And there's an underlying reason that we can look at this, not just the influence of the foreign peoples being brought into the nation of Israel, but the underlying thing is to keep a line pure,
Keep them faithful.
a line from which Christ will be born.
Oh, I see what you're
To
saying.
be kept pure. That's something that's different than today.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you make all the other comparisons, we have to remember that God wanted a certain group of these people, their lineage, to remain pure because of the promise to Abraham and Christ coming.
Well, there's two exceptions in that case. I think I may get one of them wrong, but I want to say it was Ruth and Rahab is found there in the lineage, coming down, and they took place prior to David, and it's from David's two sons, Nathan, that the family line that brings us Mary comes, and it is through Solomon the family line brings us Joseph, who was supposed the father of Jesus. And but I understand your point though. It's not simply a spiritual dilution that very well could happen, but even a physical dilution in a manner of speaking. I mean, look at the Samaritans and the trouble they had. The Jews pretty much were prejudiced against them as a result of their intermixing and intermarrying.
There's to me there's two things here that caused God to warn against the neighboring nations. The total proliferation of the nation of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been just totally, what would you call it, diluted.
Right.
Had there not been some weights and balances here, or some control over.
That's right. That's exactly right.
But marrying someone of your faith is not the fix-all.
Right.
There's just too many examples of the other side being good and that side being bad. I mean, as we look at history in our own families and everything. Just because you marry in the church doesn't solidify your trip to heaven.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, it's still back to each individual and their in the way they conduct their lives.
I can tell you about a young man who was raised by members of the church, obeyed the gospel, became a gospel preacher, taught the woman that he was going to marry when they were in high school, and they got married. He ended up falling away, incredibly falling away, and she ended up leaving the faith as well. You know, but I would strongly encourage us, and I think we probably need to say this more publicly from the pulpit, but especially behind the doors of our own homes to our children and grandchildren, to, when you go to find your spouse, first off, you've got to want to go to heaven more than anything else. If that's there, then you find someone who will help you accomplish that task. You know, I think far too often, maybe children are following the example of the parents where it doesn't come across that going to heaven is the most important thing. Therefore, in their mindset, when they're looking for a spouse, maybe they look at beauty, maybe they look at abilities, maybe it's that old love thing and all that they think that they feel and everything. You know, they don't stop to think, wait a minute, you know, here in about 40, 50 years, maybe 60 years, I'm going to kill over, and then I face the judgment. Will this person help me to get there? Now, granted, you don't know this off 3 days or 3 months or 6 months or 9 months of courtship. You're not even guaranteed after a 5-year courtship. But you can kind of get a pretty good idea, assuming they're being honest, of how deliberate they are in their willing to do what is right. And you run a gamble when you do get married. And I would not try to discourage anyone. Paul did say regarding marriage, it's better for a man not to touch a woman, but, you know, he was living as a single man, obviously. But picking your spouse is a gamble. You're trusting your instincts. You're trusting your love. You're trusting what they show you. You know, how many times have you ever heard the old story about the woman, the young lady, every time that she goes out on a date, she always pretties herself up. And then the day after they're married, they wake up together, the guy kind of hollers because he doesn't recognize. This is really, Jacob didn't marry 2 women. You know, there's only one woman. He just woke up, she didn't have her makeup done the next day. No. But that happens, though, in a figurative way of speaking. They wake up and the person that they've known for the last 9 months has now changed. Now they don't have to put on airs. They don't have to put their best foot forward. And so we must make sure that our children understand that their goal should be heaven. Therefore, when they pick a spouse for 60, 70 years on this earth, their spouse's goal should be to help them go to heaven as well. Hard choice, but
one other point.
Hard
if
lesson.
you live your life as a Christian, you're probably not going to meet too many reprobates.
That's an interesting point. Depending on what path you run in will determine
where you are in your walk as a child of God doesn't usually put you with a bunch of reprobates and a bunch of people who will take you away from your worship to God. It can happen, but what I'm saying is you have a lot better chance if you're living your life as a Christian to meet somebody who will also be conducive to a Christian walk.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And talking about that too, parents who are raising children, Christian parents, if they're more dedicated as far as their attendance and whatnot, and they don't do these little things, oh, it's not going to matter this evening because of whatever. Those children growing up, those are the ones that usually fall away and up in their years because they haven't had that real sound.
That's right.
You know, so it's kind of the same thing. You have to.
Solid foundation.
Yeah. I know, I'll give you one more example that's exactly what you're talking about. A young fellow raised, always attend services, but the woman he married was raised in the church with in her parents' attitude, well, Sunday night's not necessary to go. Wednesday night's not necessary. Sunday morning's the main thing. So after they got married, there's the problem. All right, he sees the need to go, and she doesn't. You know, and you're right. We today affect our children's behavior 20 years down the road.
Oh, you bet we do.
Or at least set a pattern for them.
You have to want to.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's not. It should not be a have to. It should be a want to.
It's like people say, well, we don't have to. It's
Right.
not, that's just something the elders came up with, is at a convenient time to have some study. We don't have to go. Well, that's the wrong attitude to start with.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing how sharp our children are. Just me teaching class, I see this. How sharp they are. They see if daddy or mama says, well, I'm in a bad mood today. I'm not going to be there, whatever. They pick up on that and they keep that in their little minds. I'm telling you.
And they'll tell on you.
They will tell on you.
They will tell on you, all right. We won't go any farther than that, but they will tell, won't they?
Exactly. I mean.
Okay. Okay, let's go back here for a moment to verse 31. They make the agreement there. They're not going to give their sons or daughters to the peoples of the land. And note that this I found quite interesting here. He says there in verse 31 there, that if the peoples of the land brought wares or any grain to sell on the Sabbath day, he says we would not buy it from them on the Sabbath or on a holy day, and we would forego the 7th year's produce and the exacting of every debt. Okay? Now, this is interesting, because he's not saying they can't buy from the wares or the grain of the people of the land. He's saying they won't do it on the Sabbath day. If the peoples of the land brought wares or any grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we will not buy from them. Okay.
This goes back to Exodus 23rd chapter, verses 10 and 11,
Okay.
where God told them that they would not do anything on the Sabbath, and that they would let their land rest on the 7th year.
Right. Right. Look at this one. And we would forego the 7th year's produce. Yep. As well as exacting of what? That was also part of what God required of them. Yeah. Now, we looking back at this, we kind of think we know, well, what's the benefit of letting a spot of land rest every 7 years?
Well, scientifically, it's perfectly reasonable to let the land refertilize and regenerate its nutrients and
Yep.
stuff. You can just wear a piece of land out where it won't grow anything.
Well, good farming
Yeah.
requires
Exactly.
that leave a certain part of land fallow every 7 years to let it regenerate itself.
Right.
That's true.
You got to take care of that piece of land,
Mhm.
and that and this results in part of the means whereby the blessings come from God. Any thoughts about that?
But then they forgave every debt.
Exactly. Every 7 years,
7 years too.
the debt was to wipe clean. Yeah. I knew a fella when we lived in Jonesboro. Part of his occupation years ago was in horticulture, teaching horticulture in schools. And every fall, they would go down to Florida for the summer. Every fall, he would plant clover, because he had a garden every year. When he's done, he'd plant clover in the garden. And he'd come back in springtime. When he came to till it, he would till all that clover and stuff underneath, and he told me it helped to make the ground richer.
It also, clover really breaks up the ground. It doesn't let it become solid packed.
Interesting. That I didn't know.
Clover puts nitrogen into the soil.
In the root systems, it cracks this. It keeps the soil loose.
That's pretty cool.
If
All
you
right.
look at Exodus 23rd chapter, verses 10 and 11, though, they were told not to even plow their fields on that 7th year.
That's a good point.
Our farmers today, they'll let the land rest, but they might plow it to keep the weeds out. As I recall, in Exodus 23rd, verses 10 and 11, part of the reason for that is so that the poor might have something to eat on that 7th year, too. You think about volunteer grains growing in the fields and everything.
By not plowing it over, I see what you're saying. Any stuff that would come back maybe from the previous year or something like that for the kind of, in a manner of speaking, gleaning the fields of sorts. It's a good possibility, yeah.
But were they allowed to go? I guess they were, just not on the Sabbath day.
Right.
Okay.
All right, let's see. All right, let's look at their verse, or Miss Pat.
No, I didn't say anything. I was just gonna say it's her
It's
turn.
Phyllis's turn. What are we looking at here? Okay, it's nothing scary. All right, Phyllis, let's read, if you would, verses 32 and 33 for us.
Also, we made ordinances for ourselves to exact from ourselves yearly 1/3 of a shekel for the service of the house of our God, for the showbread, for the regular grain offering, for the regular burnt offering of the Sabbaths, the new moons, and the set feasts, for the holy things, for the sin offerings to make atonement for Israel, and all the work of the house of our God.
Okay, and Mr. G, if you would read for us 34 and 35.
And we cast the lots among the priests, the Levites, and the people for the word offering, to bring it into the house of our God, after the houses of our fathers, at times appointed year by year, to burn upon the altar to the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. And bring the first fruits of our ground, first fruits of all fruit of all trees, year by year, to the house of the Lord.
Okay, and Sister Stewart, let's read verses 36 and 37, please.
Bring the firstborn of our sons and our cattle, as it is written in the law, and the firstborn of our herds and our flocks to the house of our God, to the priests who minister in the house of our God. To bring the first fruits of our dough, our offerings, the fruit from all kinds of trees, the new wine and oil to the priests, to the storerooms of the house of our God, and to bring the tithes of our Lord to the Levites. For the Levites should receive the tithes in all our farming communities.
Okay, and Miss Maxine, let's do 38 and 39.
And the priest and the descendants of Aaron shall be with the Levites when the Levites receive tithes. And the Levites shall bring up 1/10 of the tithes. Wait a minute.
Yeah, you're right. I scrolled it on you.
To the house of our God, to the rooms of the storehouse. For the children of Israel and the children of Levi shall bring the offering of the grain and of the new wine and the oil to the storerooms where the articles of the sanctuary are, where the priests who ministered it and the gatekeepers and the singers are. And we will not neglect the house of our God.
Okay. All righty, let's go back now to verse 32. Again, you see, basically what you see here is them again going through the law. You know, as has been referenced several times, this is all what was taught in Exodus, all that was renewed in Deuteronomy there. And he says there in verse 32 that they made ordinance for themselves to exact from ourselves a yearly 1/3 of a shekel for the service of the house of our God.
And it's $45.
$45, 1/3 of a shekel. That's pretty good. That's pretty good there, yeah. For the showbread, you've got the regular grain offering, the burnt offering of the Sabbaths, the new moons, the set feasts, for the holy things, for the sin offerings. You know, think about it, all these offerings had to be made, and they were administered or tended to by the priesthood.
This was in addition to the tithes.
That's a very good point. This would have been in addition to the required 10th that they were to give of the various blessings that they received there. And notice the last part of 33, and all the work of the house of our God. And then in verse 34, it makes point that they cast lots among the priests, Levites, the people, bringing the wood offering to the house of our Lord, according to our fathers' houses, at the appointed times, year by year, to burn on the altar of the Lord our God. You had a rotation basis here, or a casting of lots, but they would take turns and take opportunities, distributing the workload among the people there, or the priests, the Levites. They also set up ordinances to bring the first fruits of our ground, the first fruits of all the fruit of all the trees, year by year. 36, bring the firstborn of our sons and our cattle, as it's written in the law, firstborn of our herds and our flocks to the house of God. Now, the reason why this is significant is, for all intents and purposes, this had not been going on. You know, there was a measure of something happening, because the temple had been built now for a number of years, and the priests had been in the temple serving. But now that the wall has been built and the houses of Jerusalem have been built, we now have this commitment. And it may be that while things have been going on before, this is an official agreement, an official covenant, that they would honor this and bring the first fruits of everything to the priests, to the storerooms of the house of God, to bring the tithes of our land to the land of the Levites, for the Levites should receive the tithes in all our farming communities. That kind of gives you an idea of how big the tribe of Levi was and how many people there were, because we're talking about bringing tithes from all farming communities all around. All right, any thoughts?
Son, I hate to say it, but does the children interact in all this labor and offerings or anything? Do they, like from 13 up? Or I'm saying that because of, I mean, so they're leading, the children are learning through hands-on participation on
Mhm.
how to worship God.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. The people agreeing to this is everybody of understanding. So if you got 10-year-old Daniel there running around, he's going to learn from his parents to do all
And
this.
participate.
Exactly.
Okay.
And as far as, again, we're looking at regular life, regular produce, regular production, and a tenth of it being given to the Levites.
This means that all of these people had to be ready if the casting of the lots fell on them,
Right.
to have this available to give. So all of these people had to maintain their own wealth, as it were.
Well,
I'm talking about the wood and the.
Yeah, going back up here to, you're talking about the casting of lots here, that would have applied to the gathering
Of the wood.
of the wood. We cast lots among the priests, Levites, and the people for bringing the wood offering into the house of God.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
So, and not necessarily they had to have wood, but the wood that was being brought in, that was the casting of the
yeah,
lots.
they
Whether or not they had to bring it in.
exactly, yeah. All the other stuff we see down here would have been on a regular basis required of all people. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So basically, all of this stuff was available to them in the community.
Exactly. Right.
To bring in.
And they were required to do it. Because the Levites their responsibility was to teach the people the law of God, to tend to the sacrifices, tend to all that. They were, in a manner of speaking, the go-between between God and the people. And if the Levites fell down on their job, if the priests fell down, then the people, it was reflected in the people's lives.
Now, the people signing this covenant,
Mm-hmm.
that they were representatives of the families. I'm having trouble with understanding. Did this involve the whole nation of Israel at this time, or just the heads of these families?
The way that this is this way it lays out between 9 and 10, that all the people were present. And so while the signing of it took place by specific individuals, it's the whole of the people who are agreeing to the blessings and cursings here.
I know I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway. It's almost like something that's happened here in the United States recently.
Okay.
We got to sign this document so we can read it and find out what's in it.
It's a good point.
So, the heads of all the families from the nation of Israel at this
Mhm.
time were signing this covenant,
Exactly. Yeah.
which consequently involved, by them signing it, and they're the heads of the families, that put everybody in this covenant
Right.
from the nation of Israel.
Everybody
So
was
this
committed.
wasn't just a select group of people. What I'm trying to get away from here is, it's like giving your child to the service of the Lord
Mhm.
and making a covenant with the Lord. This child is yours now, he works for you. Was different from all the other kids. Because he took a vow.
Yeah. Like Hannah did with Samuel.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Or, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Samson?
Samuel.
Samuel.
You're right. But anyway, I'm just having trouble understanding this covenant that they were signing involved the entire nation of Israel.
Right.
Okay.
It was all, exactly.
This was the heads of the families,
Commitment
all
of
of the,
Men,
Yeah.
women, and
all the
children.
families.
Now, I would contend that there's a little bit of difference between Dale's example and what we're looking at here. Back in Ezra chapter 9 and 8, they actually sent people out to make sure people understood what was being taught. In his example, nobody understood what was in there before they signed it.
Well,
But
they
isn't
don't
that-
even read it.
Isn't that what they're doing here? The representatives of all the people here signed the document. And
Yeah.
now they're making sure that all the people understand exactly what is
Right.
in this document so that they know exactly how they should live.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you go back to 8 and 9, it leads up to it. There's explaining, the people of understanding were being taught, and it's, yeah. But you're right, they're making sure they all agree. They all understand what's going to be required of them.
So now we're learning all about the health care bill so we understand how we should live.
Yeah, I didn't sign it. Not so sure my representative did either. Okay, let's pull this study to a close with the last verse here. We find that the children of Israel and the children of Levi, he goes on to say that they will bring the offering of the grain, of the new wine, and the oil to the storerooms where the articles of the sanctuary are, where the priests who minister and the gatekeepers and the singers are. We will, and here, and this is probably the most important portion of what they're saying. We will not neglect the house of God. That's what they are agreeing to. We will not neglect the house of God. All right. Any thoughts or comments?
Well, when it started out, the temple had been destroyed, the walls were down, the gates were burned, and he said, "That's not going to happen again."
That's right. Exactly right. We will take care of it. That's right. All righty. Let's plan to do the questions for chapter 10 next Tuesday morning. And then we'll step into chapter 11. Any other thoughts or comments? Yes, Dan.
Just one.
Mm-hmm.
This is the nation of Israel.
Correct.
We are the spiritual nation of Israel. So if we know God's concepts according to what He required of them, we can apply this to us today in that we are representing, when we have children who are underage, we are representing them to the Lord, and we're to do our best to ensure that they live their lives according to what we understand as God's concepts for us.
That's right. That's right. And take to heart, the blessings and cursings. Take to heart Hebrews chapter 2. All right. If those individuals were unable to escape, who had disobeyed the law of God, how shall we escape? If we neglect so great a salvation. And we will likewise be blessed. There remains a rest for us, Hebrews 3 and 4, if we follow the blessings or the commandments of the Lord. All right, I appreciate all the participation and comments. Keep the Kemps in your minds and your prayers as they get the new baby ready to take to their homes. And glad to see Dan doing a little better from his tooth extraction. Yeah. You need to hang on to that. Did they do it like that was done? There's a movie where a guy took like a ice skate and knocked it out like that. Did they do that?
Very similar.
I want to know the name of your dentist. I won't go there.
Took. I was in the chair for over 2 hours.
Oh wow! They do break they have to break the tooth up, don't they?
The tooth broke off
Oh wow!
on top, and then they had to separate the two roots and take them out one at a time. And it took an hour of the dentist to get each side out.
You would think God would have made us with bigger mouths. With the problem we have with our teeth.
That wasn't my problem.
No, probably not, Miss Betty. All righty. I appreciate all the participation. And remember tonight at 7:30 p.m., point your computers to scripturalway.org. We'll be looking at the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And Dale says, I don't have my lesson yet. I'll get it to you today. Give Dan a break this morning. Gene, would you mind dismissing us in a word of prayer?
Father in heaven, we thank Thee for this time we're able to spend together as Thy children to study Thy Word, to study how Thou hast blessed Thy people when they open it. We pray that Thou would be with us. We will always remain faithful and look forward to the promise that we have from Thee of the life to come. Through Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.